Hi, Kipsters! Yesterday you started reading the story The Watsons Go to Birmingham with Miss Walsh. Today we're going to read some more excerpts from the story. Remember, Miss Walsh mentioned that we're not reading the whole story because it is rather long, but we are reading the important parts of the story. Yesterday you spoke about the genre of the story being historical fiction. Historical fiction means that although this particular story is not true, the details from the history and events are true. You also got to meet all of our main characters. You met Kenny, Byron, Joetta, Mama, and Dad. And you spent some time thinking about why the family was taking the trip from Flint, Michigan, their home, down to Birmingham, Alabama. We know that they were taking that trip because Mama and Dad wanted Byron to spend time with Grandma Sands in order to help him change out of his delinquent ways. We know that some of the things that he was doing were starting fires and getting in fights and not being very kind to others at all. And Mama and Daddy just needed Byron to shape up, so they were going to send him to Birmingham for the summer or possibly the school year to stay with Grandma Sands so that he could in fact improve his behavior. Today, our big picture is going to be focusing on the key details that the author has included. These key details help us to get a clear picture of what exactly is happening. So we're going to pay attention to how the author is describing the scene and also what the characters are saying and doing. That's going to give us a clear picture as to what exactly is happening in that particular part of the story. So just like with yesterday, we are going to skip over some of the chapters in the story in order to get to some of the more important parts. One of the sections of the story that we are going to skip over is the actual trip from Flint, Michigan down to Birmingham, Alabama. I did want to summarize it for you though so you can get a picture of what the trip looked like for the Watson family. The trip was about 750 miles, and Mama had planned out almost every detail of the trip. She wanted it to take about 3 days, and she had planned really strategically about where they were going to be making their stops throughout the trip. She did this because at that time in the United States, there were many places that unfortunately people of color were not welcome and were treated very poorly. So Mama wanted to make sure where they were stopping was safe for the family. Dad actually had another plan though. He had a plan that he didn't share with Mama, that he wanted them to drive straight through from Flint all the way down to Birmingham. And since he was driving the car, the brown bomber, he actually decided, we're just going to do that. We're going to drive straight through. He wanted to do this in order to save some money. So the trip took about 18 hours, but they drove straight from Flint, Michigan, all the way to Birmingham, Alabama, with just taking stops to eat and to go to the restroom. When they got to Birmingham, they thought that it looked a lot like it did up in Flint, Michigan. I included a section of the story that says, Birmingham looked a lot like Flint. There were real houses, no little log cabins all over the place, and great big beautiful trees. Most of all, though, there was the sun. So the family thought that Birmingham looked a lot like Flint, but we know that unfortunately, even though it looked like it wasn't going to feel the same because down in the South at that time, like I mentioned, people of color were not treated very respectfully at all. So we know that the feeling of what it's going to be like down in Birmingham is going to be much different than the feeling that they have when they're up in Flint. So at this point in the story, the Watsons have arrived in Birmingham and they've been at Grandma Sand's house for a few days. We're going to read about one of the most important parts of this story. And again, this is historical fiction, so although this particular story didn't happen, the events that we're about to read about did happen. We're going to pay attention to the key details to get a really clear picture of how it felt and what was happening during this part of the story. I know it was Sunday because I heard Joetta getting ready for Sunday school. The neighbors came and got her as soon as I got out of bed. I was standing in the doorway of the bedroom doing my morning scratches when she walked by. Hi, Kenny. See you later. Bye, Joey. She had on a fluffy white skirt a regular blouse, and the little white gloves Grandma Sands had made her. I don't know why, but I said, "Joey?" She stopped. Huh. I couldn't think why I called her name, so I just kind of threw out, "You look real pretty." She smiled and thanked me. She did look kind of pretty, too. She had on a lacy white hat and little lacy white socks and her shiny, shiny black shoes. The people that came to get her saw me, and one of them said, "How come you ain't coming to Sunday school, young man?" I smiled and said, "I forgot to get up in time." Everybody in the house knew that that was a lie, but no one seemed to care. I wondered if there was something wrong with me, because it was real easy for me to lie, even to a pack of religious people on Sunday morning. I had my cereal and went out into the backyard. It was too hot even this early in the morning, so I walked over to the giant magnolia tree and rested in the coolness of its shade. Mama stuck her head out of the back door and got ready to yell for me, but when she saw me plop down at the foot of the tree, she smiled. "Well, Kenneth, I thought you'd wandered off. How are you this morning?" It was too hot to sleep. Think you can last one more week? Uh-uh. Well, isn't this better than winter up north? Quit teasing, Mama. You know it isn't. I wish I was back in our igloo in Flint. She laughed, and the screen door closed behind her. I started going to sleep under the tree and thought I was dreaming when the noise came. I felt it more than heard it. The giant old magnolia tree shook one time like something had given it a hard snatch by the roots. Then there was a sound like a far-off thunderstorm coming, except it only thundered one long time. It seemed like every animal and bird and bug in Birmingham stopped making noise for about 2 seconds. It seemed like everything that was alive stopped whatever it was doing and was wondering the same thing. What was that noise? Doors opened in the neighborhood and people came out and looked up in the sky, but there was nothing there. Not one cloud, nothing to give a clue to what the big hollow sound was, nothing but bright, hot, stupid Alabama sun. Dad came out to the back door in pajama pants and a t-shirt. What was that? Was that back here? I shook my head. He looked like a bell went off in his head and said, "Oh Lord, where's Byron?" Byron poked his head out the door, still in his underpants, and still doing his morning scratches. "What?" he said. "I didn't do nothing. I was asleep. What was that bang?" Dad kept looking towards the sky and said, must have been a sonic boom." He closed the screen door. If that had happened in Flint, I would have invested to find out what it was, but that horrible sun had sucked all the curiosity out of me. I leaned back against the tree and closed my eyes. I don't know if I got to sleep or not, but Mama's scream made me jump nearly to the magnolia's top branch. I had never heard Mama's voice sound so bad. I felt like I did that time I stuck a bobby pin in a wall socket. I ran to the door and into the house, and Bai almost knocked me over running back towards the bedroom. "What's wrong with Mama?" I asked. I looked in the living room, but Mama and Dad weren't there. I ran back to the bedroom, where Byron was trying to wrestle into a pair of pants. "Bai, what happened?" He got the pants up and said, "A guy just came by and said somebody dropped a bomb on Joey's church." And he was gone, exploding out the front door, trying to zip up his pants at the same time he ran off the porch. Some of the time I wondered if something really was wrong with me. Byron had just told me that someone had dropped a bomb on Joey's church, hadn't he? If that was true, why did I just stand there looking stupid? If that was true, why was I only thinking about how much trouble Bai was going to be in when they heard how loud he'd slammed the screen door, and asking myself, why hadn't he put on his shoes? His socks wouldn't last 2 minutes on the Alabama mud. I ran out onto the porch and into the streets. It looked like someone had set off a people magnet. It seemed like everyone in Birmingham was running down the street. It looked like a river of scared brown bodies was being jerked in the same direction that Bai had gone, so I followed. I guess my ears couldn't take it, so they just stopped listening. I could see people everywhere making their mouths go like they were screaming and pointing and yelling, but I didn't hear anything. I saw Mama and Dad and Byron holding on to each other. All three of them looked like they were crazy and trying to keep each other away from the pile of rocks that used to be the front of the church. Mama was so upset that she even forgot to cover the space in her front teeth. I couldn't hear her, but I'd bet $1 million she was shouting, "Why?" over and over like a real nut. It looked like Dad's mouth was yelling, "Joetta!" I was kind of surprised no adults stopped me from walking right up to the church. I got right next to where the door used to be when the guy came out with a little girl in his arms. He had on the same thing Dad did, a t-shirt and pajama pants, but it looked like he'd been painting with red paint. The little girl had on a blue dress and a little blue frilly socks and black shiny shoes. I looked into the church and saw smoke dust flying around like a tornado was in there. One light from the ceiling was still hanging down by a wire, flickering and swinging back and forth. And every once in a while, I could see stuff inside. I could see a couple of grown-ups moving around, looking lost, trying to pick things up. Then the smoke would cover them, and then the bulb would flicker out and they'd disappear. I could see Bibles and coloring books thrown all over the place. Then they'd get covered up by the smoke. I could see shiny black shoe lying halfway under some concrete. Then it got covered with smoke, and then the light bulb flickered out again. I bent down to pull the shoe from under the concrete and tugged and pulled at it, but it felt like something was pulling at it back. Oh man, I gave the shoe one more big tug, and it popped loose from a frilly white sock. I got really scared. I walked as slowly and as quietly as I could out of the church. I walked past where the adults were screaming and pointing. I walked past where the guy had set the little girl in blue, right next to where someone else had set a little girl in red. I knew if Julie was down next to those girls, those two dresses would make the red, white, and blue American flag. Grown-ups were kneeling down by them, and adults' hands fluttered down towards the little girls, then, before they touched anything, fluttered back up, over and over. Their hands looked like a little flock of brown sparrows that were too nervous to land. I walked past people lying in little balls on the grass crying and twitching. I walked past people squeezing each other and shaking. I walked past people hugging trees and telephone poles, looking like they were afraid they might fly off the earth if they let go. I walked past 1 million people with their mouths wide open and no sounds coming out. I didn't look behind me as I walked back as quickly as I could to Grandma Sand's house. So we're going to pause here for a second and think about some of the key details and the way that the author described the scene at the church. So what are some of those details that the author included to help us understand the severity of the situation at the church? I know he mentioned that Kenny's hearing kind of like blacked out. He couldn't hear anything. And I know that when people get really nervous, that can happen sometimes where they almost, even though their ears are working, they can't hear anything. I also know that he mentioned what Mama and Daddy looked very, very nervous and looked like they were shouting things. So that tells me that they were probably feeling very scared. He talked about all the smoke and the broken rocks that he saw in the church, the coloring books and the Bibles dispersed everywhere, people crying and hunched down on the ground. So all those little details really describe to me that the scene at the church was very, very devastating and sad, that people were very, very nervous and anxious to find their loved ones, and that there was a lot of unfortunate things that people were seeing. Now we're picking back up a little bit further in the chapter. We know that Kenny is already back at Grandma Sand's house, and he's kind of in shock because of what he's just seen. So at first, when he sees Joey, he thinks that he's just imagining it because he thinks that Joey was in the church. But Joey is in fact in the house, and this is really happening. But it takes Kenny a few minutes to understand that Joey is really in fact in the house. Joey! After a second, she came back into my bedroom. What? She was sounding real mean. I didn't look up. I kept looking at my hands. I love you. Whoop. The shiny, ripped black shoe hit me right in my chest. Whose shoe is that? I finally looked up to see what Joey looked like. There was no ropes around her waist, and nobody with square toes was hanging around. But what really surprised me was that Joey had both of her shiny black shoes in her hand. She'd taken them off at the front door. Kenneth Bernard Watson, you better tell me what's going on. I'm really gonna tell. I'm not playing with you. Joey was imitating Mama so much that she didn't say Bernard, she said Bernard. Joey, didn't you go to Sunday school? You know I did. Don't you know what happened? Joey sat back down next to me. Kenny, I'm not playing with you. Why are you acting so weird? Her voice was starting to get all choky. Why aren't you still in the church? It was so hot in there that I went out and stood on the porch and saw you. Saw me? Where? Kenny, you'd better stop this nonsense. You know you waved at me from across the street. You know when I tried to come to you, you kept laughing and running in front of me. You know I chased you all the way down the street. Joey got a funny look on her face. But you had on different clothes. Joey's voice was getting high with everything she said. And when she was done, she was sounding real crazy. Joey, That's it! You're through this time, mister. You don't know when to stop teasing, do you? That's it. I'm telling on you. Joey stood up and ran out the stairs screaming, Mommy! 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 I could hear Grandma Sands moving around upstairs, and she finally clomped down the steps and came into my room. Joey was hanging on her arm, still screaming. Grandma Sands must have real thin blood, because even though it was hot as a furnace in the house, she had on a big, thick nightgown and a big, thick robe. The smell of baby powder came into the room a second after she did. What on earth are y'all doing raising so much Cain this early in the morning? Joetta, honey, stop that noise. Kenny, what's wrong with this child? Joetta finally said, He's trying to scare me, Grandma Sands. He won't tell me where Mommy is. Joey kept boo-hooing like a real idiot. Kenneth, where's Winona and Daniel? Grandma Sands pulled Joey off her leg and held her shoulders and gave her a little shake. Joetta, you stop that noise. Grandma Sands can't handle that much noise this early, sweetheart. Grandma Sands said, What are all them sirens doing? Lord, this whole world gone mad today. Where's your mama and daddy? The last thing I heard was Grandma Sands yelling, Boy, if you slam that door like that again. I looked down and saw my socks flying over the Alabama mud. So that is the end of the chapter. Based on the key details, what can we tell is happening to Kenny once he got back to Grandma Sands' house after being at the church? So we know that Kenny heard the big loud boom, and Byron told him that someone had dropped a bomb on the church that Joey was at for Sunday school. When he got to the church, he went inside and found what he thought was Joey's black shiny shoe. That kind of put him in shock because I think that in his head he was thinking that might have been Joey. He headed back to Grandma Sands' house, and again he's still in shock, and he thinks that when Joey comes in the house that he's just imagining all of this. But it was actually Joey. Joey had left Sunday school and had headed back to the house. So Joey was in fact fine. She did not get hurt in the church bombing. But we know that because of all of this kind of shock that Kenny's going through, he's imagining things that are happening in his head. So tomorrow we're going to finish reading the story and we're going to find out what happened after the bombing at the church. Make sure to tune in tomorrow.